I'm Peggy Newell. I'm the Deputy Provost of Harvard University, and it's my pleasure to introduce our next panel. As we've heard today, a lot goes into changing a culture and changing an organization. And at the root of any successful change is, of course, an understanding of the problem that you're trying to solve. And so our next panel is going to talk about the importance of data in being the foundation of solving these problems. So it's my pleasure to start by introducing Kathleen McGinn. Kathleen is the Cahners-Rabb Professor of Business Administration and the Senior Associate Dean for Faculty Strategy and Recruiting at Harvard Business School. Professor McGinn studies the role of gender and social class at work, at home, and in negotiations. She's co-chair of the steering committee for the Harvard 2019 AAU survey. Nicole Murhill is the university's Title IX officer. Nicole joined the Harvard Title IX office in 2016, and she has more than 15 years of civil rights experience in various protected class statuses, including sex, race, color, national origin, disability, and age. Nicole is a member of the steering committee for Harvard's 2019 AAU survey. She oversees the university's Title IX efforts, and she's partnering with me in representing Harvard as founding members of the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine's Action Collaborative. Kacey Gill is a Harvard College junior living in Kirkland House with joint concentrations in social studies and African American studies. She's the president of the Association of Black Harvard Women, as well as an intern at the Harvard Foundation for Intercultural and Race Relations. Her goal at Harvard is to make sure that minorities feel that their voices are being heard and that they have a space on campus. John Wilson serves as the senior advisor and strategist to the president of Harvard University and leads the university's inclusion and belonging efforts. Dr. Wilson is the former president of Morehouse College, former head of the White House Initiative on Historically Black Colleges and Universities, and a former senior administrator at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And our moderator, Rachel DeBella, who in addition to having a lot to do with putting on this program today, is the university's Title IX Education Program Manager. And in that role, she designs, facilitates, and evaluates prevention and education awareness programming on sexual and gender-based harassment and discrimination, which is offered to thousands of people across the Harvard community annually. Rachel serves as an advisor and as chair of the Student and Staff Title IX Liaison Committees. Okay, Rachel.
Okay, it's working now. Good afternoon, everyone. Folks have seen and heard from me a couple of times today. I promise this is the last time. Thank you so much, Peggy, for introducing us, and really to everybody for being willing to not only join in, but really persist in a conversation today. I am seeing so many of you who have engaged with the folks sitting next to you, asking wonderful and really important questions throughout this morning and afternoon, and I hope that you will join us this evening for our evening keynote. You know, this really feels like a day of witnessing for me and for many of us. There are so many ways that we, as community members and as the community members that make up Harvard, can make our voices heard and can be seen and to make our stories known. Sometimes that means writing a opinion letter to the Crimson or to the Harvard Gazette. Sometimes that means participating in conversations in the classroom with our faculty, with our mentors. And there are also times in which we may engage by, in sort of macro level instruments and efforts to gain a better sense of what is going on in the community. So that's something that we'd like to focus on a bit today, as we have some renowned and great members of our community here to speak to that. I'd actually like to begin with you, Kathleen. The Harvard Crimson has covered surveys across campus over the past year. And in particular, the Harvard Crimson editorial board wrote recently about what they called an overchecked pulse in the Harvard community, referring to the multiple surveys that have taken place over the past year. So I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit about what you hope a survey like AAU would do to bring the student community, particularly around these issues that matter most to you.
Yes, fully agree that we're overpulsed, so thanks for the question, Rachel. We like to think that Harvard can lead, and implied in that is that Harvard leads alone. And reducing and hopefully eliminating sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, sexual violence is not something that Harvard can do alone. So this survey is part of a 33 university consortium. It was done 5 years ago with 26. And we are trying to work as a community. So ideally, we probably would have asked a few different survey questions. We would have had the survey be somewhat different, but we were one very, very active voice among 33, and we will be one community adding to a much larger conversation. So this survey allows us to be part of a big effort to try to change the way higher education deals with gender. Not only with sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, sexual violence, but gender more broadly. There's lots and lots to learn. Yes, we're over-surveyed, and we hope that that doesn't mean that people don't respond to this. But it was really critical that we be part of this, that we not just say, been there, done that.
Great. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Kacey, I'd love to be able to ask you a question kind of pertaining to the student experience. I mentioned already today there's been this common thread and theme throughout the morning and afternoon, which is about the power of telling one's story. Kathleen, thank you for, I think, highlighting that this survey is a means of telling one's story. Kacey, I'm curious if you can share a little bit about, from where you sit, particularly as a student leader, how a survey might be an instrument to help meet the needs and interests of students, and maybe in short, why does it matter that students engage with an instrument like this?
So I think that fundamentally it's super important that student voices are not only heard but actually listened to. And I think tangible steps like surveys are important. I do think it can get frustrating at times because a survey is one very small step in a long process. And oftentimes the results of these surveys, the changes that are made because of these surveys don't happen until after the students have already graduated. So from my perspective as a student, when I'm filling out these surveys, when I'm having all of these conversations with different administrators, it's not work that I'm doing for myself, it's work that I'm doing for the students who are gonna come 4 years after me, which is just a different mindset than I think a lot of people have. They wanna see something in 4 months, they wanna see something in 6 months, which is also a valid thing to want. But I mean, in a place like this, with this much history, that's not how change works. Oftentimes, I think, yeah.
Thank you so much. I think that's a nice transition. Nicole, I'm curious if you can share a bit about what has changed since the sexual assault and misconduct survey through the AAU was first administered at Harvard in 2015 to now. I think students in particular and the community more widely is curious to know what is different.
Sure, that's a great question. And Kacey, your description is right on point. I was reflecting on 2014, 2015, and how our office, the Title IX office, and the Office for Dispute Resolution look different. And the reality is, as I was thinking about this, is none of the staff members who are currently in the Title IX office were here. And we weren't here not because we didn't work for Harvard, it was because our office is entirely new positions. While we had 2 positions within the university, a Title IX officer and director of the Office for Sexual and Gender-Based Dispute Resolution and a lead investigator, those positions have changed, and we now have 2 fully staffed offices working on these issues. In the Title IX office, Rachel's position of Education Program Manager was designed specifically to address some of the issues that the prior panel raised just moments ago around the importance of in-person, customized bystander intervention training. Rachel was hired over the summer, this past summer, not quite a year ago, and one of the first projects that I assigned to her before she even started working here was, we need a bystander intervention program and we need it now. And that's the first program that she kicked off, in addition to the staff and student Title IX liaison committees. The position I originally started with at Harvard, the deputy Title IX officer position, also didn't exist back in 2015. And when I was brought on specifically to do prevention work. I can go on and on about the various roles that were brought in to meet the interests of the community, but the bottom line was making sure that we had more resources in place to meet the needs of the community. I'd be remiss if I didn't also reference the Office for Dispute Resolution, which is a separate office from the Title IX office, and that's a very unique configuration. That change was made based on feedback that we received from students in particular, but also staff and faculty, who raised concerns about the 2 offices being overseen by one person. So in April of 2017, the offices were split in 2. The Title IX office is a separate entity. The Office for Dispute Resolution is now positioned to hear cases if a person chooses to file a formal complaint, is able to hear cases not only under the sexual and gender-based harassment policy, but under other policies within the university. The Title IX office, beyond the prevention work that I described earlier, also is in the role of supporting individuals who come forward to their local Title IX coordinators with concerns under the sexual and gender-based harassment policy. I can go on and on, but a couple of other pieces. I talked a lot about in-person training, online training. I think the reality of when you're trying to ensure that 18,000 faculty and staff are aware of their role as a responsible employee and aware of the existence of key offices as resources on campus, whether it's the Office of Sexual Assault Prevention and Response, the Harvard Chaplains, the Employee Assistance Program, and knowing the fundamental point that sharing a concern with the Title IX coordinator is not the same as filing a formal complaint, that's something that in reality we have to achieve through online training. Historically, back in the last iteration of the survey, we purchased an off-the-shelf product like the majority of institutions still use today. We heard from students, we heard from staff, we heard from faculty that it missed the mark. Didn't talk about our policy, it didn't talk about our resources, it didn't talk about what it means to be a responsible employee. So we worked with focus groups of students, focus groups of staff, focus groups of faculty, and we developed online customized training for Harvard. We have 11 customized online training modules. We had none when we first administered the survey. Are they perfect? No. We certainly have a lot more work to do, and we'd continue to encourage all of you to work with us to move the needle forward, but a lot has changed, and we have a long way to go.
Thank you so much for that. John, I want to shift gears a little bit and think about the efforts that you are not wrapping up with the Pulse survey, but probably just beginning, because I know that the survey has closed and some information has come in. You are the senior advisor and strategist to the president as the university pursues implementing the recommendations from the Presidential Task Force on Inclusion and Belonging. I know that the Pulse survey has closed, and reports are suggesting, I think there was a response rate of over 40%. congratulations on that. And I'm curious if you can share a bit on next steps, because what we're talking about is what happens after the data comes in. Can you share a bit about what your vision is and what your hopes are for the community?
Sure. So I think you all know that this stems from the Task Force on Inclusion and Belonging. It recommended the survey and a number of other things, strategic plans, all of that is underway. You're right, the Pulse survey has been administered. 24,000 responses, the most ever for a survey at Harvard University in its history. 44% response rate. So we do have a lot of data to analyze. We're working with some experts led by Professor Andrew Ho at the School of Education to draw the meaning from it and the indications as to what we should do. I believe Kacey's right that we're going to try to reduce the lag time between what we hear and what we do, because how we act and how we react is who we are. If we can reduce that lag time, then we think some of the experiences we heard about from those particular students, you'll see changes on campus. I think it's important to put this in context. I was a graduate student at Harvard. When I arrived here, the Harvard faculty was 99% male and 99% white. And that was not in 1880, that was in 1980. So it's more recent than that. And I just want you to know that Harvard has evolved. There are more women on faculty. It's 27% of the tenured faculty are women, and a third, no, it's less minority, about 20% minority. But the tenure track is 40% women and 33% minority. So Harvard is in the process of changing. We just admitted the second class that is predominantly minority, 51%. The second class in a row, freshman class. But what Drew Faust affirmed with that task force is that the intellectual fruits of diversity do not harvest themselves, that there are things that we have to do beyond the hiring decisions and the admissions decisions to ensure that everybody at Harvard is able to flourish. That's the importance of the survey, because we get to hear the voices. This is a Pulse survey. It was, by show of hands, how many of you took the Pulse survey, please? Thank you. I want to say thank you to you. I mean, this was a great thing to happen at Harvard University. We're going to try to hear from more voices on the road ahead. We're going to track the progress from survey to survey. This was a heavy survey year. It won't be this intense every year. And to the comment about the overuse of the Pulse, we've been over Pulse, I think you're going to see some fruits from these efforts, so stay tuned.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I'd like to turn another question to Kathleen. It's so exciting to hear about what is possible when that information is made available, and to the point that John just made about students either fatigue with surveys or just how ubiquitous they may be perceived to be in the community. We are hearing that folks may be making some comparisons between Pulse and between this survey that is now launched as of today, the Harvard 2019 AAU survey. What can you tell us about how these are different? You started to touch on this earlier, but I'm wondering if you can share a bit more.
Yeah, they're very different. So Pulse is a great way to describe John's survey. It was quick. There were a few questions. You could get through it quite easily. I would love to say that somehow we have accomplished that, but the AAU survey is almost the opposite of that in ways that are very critical to our understanding. So the last panel, and Ira started off very nicely talking about the need to really have data so that you then can turn that into information. So you can turn that into knowledge and understanding so that you can start to create thoughtful change that's specific to the problem. At Harvard, we are fantastic. I mean, we're a community of scholars. What we study is other things. We don't study ourselves so much. This survey, like John's survey, allows us to study ourselves, but this survey is, so if you are reporting any incidents, not reporting in a sort of Title IX sense, but if you're talking about any incidents when you respond to the survey, it's long, it's triggering. It was painful to be a part of writing it. But it is also absolutely critical down to the, like, when did this happen? Where did this happen? Et cetera. It also asks you a lot about what Harvard's doing, what we're doing wrong. Why don't you report? I haven't shared this with Nicole. Nicole and I talk all the time, but I think the biggest success we could possibly have after a few of these surveys is that we, like, Title IX shrinks back down to nothing, because what we have is a community that is so inclusive, that is so diverse in terms of what we understand to be sort of who's a leader, formal, informal, how do we treat one another, that is so much part of who we are that sort of reporting goes to nothing. Right now, we rely on reporting for data, and we know reporting is very, very infrequent. So hopefully through this survey, we can understand why people don't report, start to change that so that reporting can change, and then we can also simultaneously and hopefully get bigger and bigger into changing the community. And again, with the rest of the universities involved, changing higher education. So it's a very, very different kind of survey, and it will take you some time to fill out.
Thank you. I'm hearing and thinking about the ways in which this also connects to students' wishes for customized resources. Nicole mentioned that a moment ago. And Kacey, I have a question for you. In a recent interview with the Harvard Crimson, you emphasized the importance of creating resources, I want to quote you correctly, resources for sexual assault that are, quote, specifically designed and implemented for Black women, end quote. What would progress look like on this front? If Harvard were doing better in, for you as a student leader, what would that look like?
Well, I mean, I think the first step is fundamentally self-awareness. And also, I think Harvard, quite frankly, kind of needs to take itself off of its pedestal and realize that we are all people. We are also a reflection of the flaws that are inherent to the society that we exist in. And we need to be okay with being uncomfortable within that. And we need to be ready to really to fight against that, to hold ourselves accountable, to hold our friends accountable, to hold this whole community accountable, not just through one lens, but through a fundamentally intersectional lens as well. I think specifically for Black women, which is what I spend a lot of my time examining and fighting for, I think that there needs to be some compassion that's not there across the board. I think that we talk a lot about, like, we want diversity here, we want people from all sorts of different backgrounds, but we're also not willing to give those diverse people the space to heal, deal with the trauma that they're bringing as people of color, as women, as trans and queer bodies. We're not willing to create safe spaces on this campus too. So I think that's number one. We need to do that. That's progress. And I think specifically in regards to sexual assault, there needs to be broader conversations where the people who are going to come to this conference, this summit, are a certain type of people. There's also a lot of people who are not here. And there needs to be conversations that include those people who chose to not be here for whatever reasons. So that they can understand why it's different for me as a Black woman to come to Title IX and report an assault that was done by another Black man. Understanding the nuances of that situation and why that might bring just different complications. So I think those are to like first steps of progress.
Thank you so much. Nicole, I'm curious if you can share a bit about some of the, I know as we endeavor to improve and customize and really meet the needs of the community, it involves listening, right, and hearing. I'm curious if you can share a bit about some of the criticisms that came up from the AAU survey in 2015, how that shifted the approach to now. I think that speaks a bit to Kacey's point about really what it means to be heard and to have one's experiences and needs represented in resources.
Sure. One of the challenges with re-administering a survey again is that you need to maintain a sufficient portion of the core instrument so that you have comparative data. So the struggle for the customization working group for the survey was finding that balance between maintaining enough of the core instrument so that we had comparative data, while at the same time honoring the feedback that we received from our students. There were two changes to the 2019 survey that enabled us to move the needle a little bit closer in the right direction, and that was every participating institution was given the opportunity to develop customized interspersed questions. Now that sounds amazing, and we all heard that and wanted to draft many, many questions and completely change the survey. But the reality is we had a limited number of those customized questions and specific locations within the survey where we could place those questions. So we worked really hard with the steering committee, the customization working group, and key stakeholders across the university to identify which of those areas that we heard from our students about could really be modified to meet their interests. I could tell you that this process of hearing from our community continued on until about 4 weeks ago, when, as part of the Pulse survey, we started hearing from the community concerns about the sexual orientation, gender identity questions on the Pulse survey. And when we started to hear that feedback, we quickly, I frantically reached out to Westat and said, and Kathleen, and said, do we have time? Can we reprogram? Can we work together to make sure we get this right? And the answer was yes. And so we together pulled together stakeholders to add another interspersed question into the survey so that we're closer to getting it right for our students. Other areas before 3 weeks ago were being really mindful that we heard from our grad professional students that the 2015 survey felt very college-centric. It didn't have their organizations, it didn't have their programs, the language felt like college language. It didn't feel like their survey. So in every opportunity we could possibly have, whether it's looking at the organizations that we're identifying, we made sure that we weren't talking about just student newspapers. We were as nuanced as saying journals, because we know at the law school and at the biz school and at our grad professional schools, people are writing for journals, not for newspapers. We took those lists, we ran those by grad professional schools to make sure we were getting it right. There were many, many of those examples throughout the life of the survey where we really attempted to answer the interests of the students. The final area that I'd highlight is around not just prevalence of sexual assault and sexual violence on campus, but precipitating locations. So the locations where people were just prior to the incident of sexual assault and sexual violence, because that was a gap in the data that we just didn't have. So that was an interspersed customized question that we built in. The second grouping of opportunity to get a little bit closer to meeting the interests of our community was we were afforded the opportunity to include up to 10 open response questions. And Harvard took advantage of including the maximum number. We have 10 open response questions on the survey, including a final question on the survey that really invites our students to offer feedback on their experience and what we could be doing better.
Thank you so much. I want to be mindful of time for questions. Before we turn to that, I have a final question for you, John. You are, I think you already mentioned, I think you're a 3-time alum of Harvard, the former president of Morehouse College. I'm sitting here with all of you and wondering why I get to sit here with all of you right now, actually. You have such a deep and diverse perspective on change, right? This process of change that we've been talking about. I'm curious if you can share a bit with us, not only about, you've reflected a bit on where Harvard has been. Can you share a bit with us about where you see Harvard going, where you hope to see it going in these areas?
Yeah, Nicole put a lot of emphasis on getting this right, and Kacey talked about what success looks like. It's really important to underscore those two things because we are trying to get this right. And this is a Harvard that's very different from the one I attended. The reason why we made it, the Pulse Survey, a pilot is because we knew we don't know everything. And so we, out of 24,000 responses, we got about 60 emails from people. We're going to rethink the way we do the sexual orientation question. We're going to rethink the way we do the disabilities question. Maybe 1 or 2 other adjustments. We're going to think about the road ahead. But this whole effort, it's important that everybody here understand that when Drew Faust first announced this effort of the task force, she said that this is pursuant to realizing the full promise of Harvard University. And what she is clarifying is that Harvard is not yet realizing the greatness that it is called to realize, that there's something in. So unlike the national conversation, Harvard is convinced that our greatness is ahead of us and not behind us. And that's very important. And Larry Bacow, as our new president, has said that, he used the term true excellence. In order for Harvard to realize true excellence, diversity is a pathway to it. So we're pretty much doubling down on this. I think the messaging is right from the top, and that's important. I see Neil and Lee in the back, 2 members of the team who helped to pull the Pulse survey together. I thank them for what they've done, and I thank Alan Garber, our provost here, whose messaging, maybe some of you all can't appreciate this, but I remember a time when I was here as a student banging on doors and banging on tables saying that there's no Afro-American Studies department here. There was barely a program. And I went to go visit the couple of professors in that program. Yeah, both of them. And that's the way it was then. There wasn't much of a curriculum, and now it's the #1 department in the world, African and African American Studies department. Harvard can change. I've seen it, and it is changing. So I have this longitudinal view, and I think the place where we're going now is to fulfill the full promise of Harvard University. I think Harvard is going to be a much greater place. Sustainable, inclusive excellence is what we're after. We're trying to be a place where everyone can do their best work while becoming their best selves. We realize that's not the case right now, and we're going to struggle to get there with your help.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. Yeah, thank you to our panelists. I want to leave some time for Q&A, but I just want to thank you all for answering the questions that I brought here today, so thank you very much. We have some time for questions for the panel if anybody would like to. Yeah, I think, Alex, you have a microphone, right? So feel free to raise your hand. And
as they're walking around, I have to make a shameless plug for this evening's event. I believe we have less than 75 tickets left for the evening. please go to the box office. Christian Siriano, Laverne Cox, our amazing speaker from this morning, Jess Weiner, and Nicolette Mason will be joining us in Mem Church. I do have a couple of tickets in hand up here. Find me, go to the box office, and please join us this evening. There's also a photo booth for hashtagging photos, hashtag Harvard Hears You. They'll be here for a little while longer, so grab a photo before you leave as well. And now for questions.
Hello, thank you all for contributing on today's panel. I'm just wondering, as kind of a mid-level staff member, wanting to improve our office and wanting to be able to be that resource for students and their various intersecting identities, I don't often have access to data or information that would help me improve our processes. And I was wondering if there will be plans to help make that data and information trickle down to folks who could actually implement it on the ground.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So as Peggy and I as co-chairs, one of the things that we've said is that just getting the survey right, like that just gets you started. Now we have to do the analysis and then really share what we've learned. And that's when the community really can come in and say, okay, now what do we do with what we've learned? And I think that's probably even more true for Johns in terms of really trying to share and go. Frank Dobbin mentioned Deloitte, which had very successful sort of early mover changes in terms of gender. And one of the things that they recognized was critical was change was from the middle, from grassroots, from the top. It has to come from all over, and that requires lots and lots of data sharing. So I know we will be, and I'm sure John's office will be as well, sharing as much as we possibly can, and the change only comes from the people inside the organization. So we will get out there, and if you're not hearing it, you should personally call me or call John or call Peggy.
So let me comment on that as well. We made a commitment with this as a pulse to report at the university level only in this first year. We're going to make some decisions about the road ahead. So we'll be top line, but even still, I think there are some things that can be done more locally. It is a pulse. It's not an MRI or an EKG. It's a pulse. It's just to give some indications of where some challenges might be, where some opportunities might be. I see Frank Dobbin here. He's one of the faculty members helping us out to figure out the road ahead for Harvard. But I also see Dr. Alexis Stokes. And her school is an example. She's at SEAS, School of Engineering. Her school is an example of a complementary work with the Pulse survey. So we're doing the Pulse, but even before she gets any Pulse results for research purposes, they've done their own survey pretty exhaustively for SEAS. And Dean Frank Doyle has fully owned all of the challenges there. They've done a lot of listening, and they really are a model for the other schools on how to make progress. The Pulse will only supplement, not substitute, supplement what they do. And we believe that the other schools engaging in best practices here, I see Naisha here from the School of Design, we're going to be helping, we're going to be assisting and coordinating. So it will be an ongoing process to learn, and we're going to get the information down well into the organization.
Hi. So one of the questions, I was very impressed when SEAS hired Alexis. I worked with SEAS, and it was great to see her coming, and the Pulse survey, because it does feel like Harvard is finally listening and somebody is actually working to make a model and make an example. And then the university task force making the Pulse survey, it's really great. Things maybe are going to change. But then I wonder, is this going to be, the task force in particular, is it going to be a 1 year, is it 2 year, or is it going to be a department, I don't know, program that's here to stay? It's not only, are there plans to keep it ongoing and to work with following surveys? Because it's great to have one so that you can measure progress, but.
Yeah.
Are there commitments to that?
We're going to be, we're here to solve a big problem. Harvard culture has been in formation for nearly 400 years. So it's going to take some time to move out of this. And we'll probably be around as long as the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, all those movements designed to move the culture. Right now, we are an office. We're a division of the office of the president and provost, and that's important too. When I was a student, I didn't see that here. So it's from the top. It's a top-down, but it's also bottom-up. So we'll be around a while, and you'll see some changes in the culture. I believe that.
I want to be mindful of time. We have some closing remarks today that I know we want to get to, and so I want to thank everybody for the questions you have asked of this panel. Thank you all for the perspectives, the work that you do, the insights you lend. Thank you very much.
What a great question.